I'm Sanjay Gupta. I'm the Dean at Michigan State University. Leigh and the Rutgers team, thank you for hosting this conference. I was delighted to work with Leigh and Anil in at least trying to think about what we might be able to accomplish through a conference like this. And as soon as we got talking about it, it became pretty clear that one of the first things we ought to do is really talk to the people who hire what we produce in some sense. So the people who are at the other end of recruiting the talent and trying to get a sense from them about the important issues that are on their mind, how they view all of this graduate business education that we are putting together on our campuses. So it was with that in mind that we said we'll kick off the conference really with a panel of folks from industry, and that's what we're going to do. So we've got, well, between last night's speaker this morning, Rich's talks, it's very clear that there is one or two words that keep coming up a lot. The notion around change is one, if you think, is spoken often. Just so you know that we put it in practice this morning, I had a tie on. Mike Seneski here to my right had a tie on. And in comes Art, with a golf shirt and saying, so we're looking at him and what's the deal with this? And Mike says, well, we should take our tie off. So I conformed, I changed. Just so you know, deans can change, I suppose.
I asked for casual from the beginning, but I didn't get that. So
right. I wanted to emphasize that I'm retired.
So anyway, with knowing that change is on our minds, here are three individuals. I want to just briefly introduce them to you. What I asked them is also then to spend a couple of minutes sharing their background and what it is in their capacity that they are interacting with the kind of talent pool that we are creating and developing. And then we've got a few prepared questions that I'd ask of each of the panelists, and after that we'll open it up for Q&A. Hopefully we'll have at least about 20 minutes or so at the end for that. First, let me introduce Art Certosimo. Art is presently the Vice Chairman and a member of the Board of Advisors of Promontory Interfinancial Network. It's the leading provider of FDIC-insured deposit placement services. Art has had a long and a distinguished career in international banking, most recently with the Bank of New York Mellon for several years, and prior to that with Morgan Stanley Asset Management, as well as with Chase Manhattan Bank's Global Investor Services Group. Art is currently the chairman of the Board of Overseers of the Rutgers Foundation, and chairman of the Board of Advisors of the Rutgers Business School. He has a BA from Rutgers and an MBA from Farley Dickinson University. The other panelist we have is Natalya Leahy. She's the Vice President of Finance for Holland America Line and Princess Cruises. Natalia is a graduate of the Broad College. She got her MBA in 2006 from Michigan State, and then stepped into a senior financial analyst position at Procter & Gamble. With a series of higher management and executive roles in Procter & Gamble over the years that she was with them, including the GLAD joint venture project that was there between P&G and Clorox. She was intimately involved in that as their finance leader. Since last year, she's joined Holland America Group and is involved in a great deal on the financial side of things with them. Prior to coming to Michigan State, though, she was the United Nations Country Finance Manager for Uzbekistan. So quite a global and international perspective that she brings to our conversations. And the third panelist is Mike Seneski. Mike, I've had the good fortune to know him over the years, and especially in the last few in my current role. Mike is the Director of Corporate Strategy for Ford Motor Company. And in that capacity, he has responsibility for the entire future direction of the company globally. And you know what's going on in that industry. And so Mike is in the midst of being able to not only see, but also shape what's happening in his industry. Prior to his current role, though, Mike was the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer of Ford Motor Credit Company, one of the largest captive financial companies in the world. Just to give you a sense, their year-end 2014 receivables were over $110 billion. And prior to his CFO role, he served as Controller of Global and U.S. Marketing and Sales for Ford Motor. Has had his career pretty much entirely with Ford. He joined them in 1989. He got his undergraduate degree at Michigan State. And Rich, he's one of your alums, Rich Lyons. He got his MBA at Haas. I don't know how well he remembers your values. We should ask him. Perhaps, it's a live test of that. Currently, Mike also sits on the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, the Detroit branch board of directors. So would you join me in welcoming our panelists for today? With that, I'm going to sit and moderate from here. How's that? So, Art, do you want to?
Sure.
Take a couple of minutes?
Hear me okay? So briefly, spent all of my career on Wall Street, 36 years, in pretty much every capacity that you can think of in banking, right from back office operations through to CEO of global trading. And, I must admit, one of the words Sanjay said and everybody's saying, change. I'll tell you, banking's gone through massive change in the last 6 or 7 years since the credit crisis, since Lehman's collapse. So much change that it's been difficult for many people to deal with. So we think the new executives coming in and the new students, the new employees coming in from graduate schools and undergraduate are going to play a major role in reshaping banking beyond what the regulators have shaped. But I think one of the most difficult things for bankers to deal with is that, before the credit crisis, we were pretty much fat, not so dumb, and very happy. And then the credit crisis came, and the whole thing changed. And we were lower than lawyers from the perspective of social value. And, people started calling us banksters instead of bankers. And that was a difficult thing for most very proud bankers to deal with, but it was kind of more like a shock and awe because we, as an industry on Wall Street, spent probably from 2009 to 2011 trying to fight back and fight the changes. And that was a bad idea. So it wasn't really until we said, okay, this is here to stay, that we're going to have to realize that we're going to have to deal with the changes that have come in banking, and I think bankers are still changing. So I'll leave it at there as what my background was and the setup for what role the finance industry, particularly Wall Street, can play in this discussion, but we're going to have to rely on higher education to help that new crowd coming in and deal with a very new environment.
Natalia.
All right. Well, first of all, I also did not wear a tie, but I did not inspire them enough until Art showed up. I want to start, what a humbling experience, right? What a humbling experience to sit in front of all of you. I am here because my favorite professor, who gave me a lot of sleepless nights and headaches, I was his graduate assistant, called me and asked me to be here, Glenn Amura. And the reason I'm sharing it, we talked a lot about transformations. You are someone's favorite professor. You are touching people's lives every day, making them believe they can be more than they are today. And that's a lot, I think, what we are going to talk about today. My journey did not start with United Nations, not with Procter & Gamble, not even with Michigan State. I was in Uzbekistan. I'll share a story of my very first job interview. I was 17. I just started. I got a full scholarship in one of the most prestigious financial universities in Uzbekistan. I started there full of inspirations. I desperately needed a job because my family was going through the post-Soviet Union economic collapse. And the first international hotel, 5-star hotel, opened in Uzbekistan. So I showed up in this hotel, and with a boldness that only 17 years old has, that we are all losing with wisdom, I went straight into the office of a financial director there. It was an American expatriate person. I must have been lucky that his secretary stepped away, otherwise I never would have gotten that FaceTime. I got in and I said, do you have a minute? I really need to talk to you. And he said, what do you want to talk about? I said, you need to hire me for your finance department. He said, why do I need to hire you? I said, I'll be your best finance person you ever employed, and I really need this job. And he said, well, what skills and education you have? I said, oh, I have 3 months in the best financial school in the country. And he laughed. He said, you know, we're hiring a lot of people. There are a lot of positions open in our restaurant, and we have a lot of receptionist positions open. And there was this moment when my knees were shaking because I desperately needed that income. And somehow, to my own surprise, I said, no, I really need a job in your finance department because I will never be your best receptionist, but I'll be your best finance employee. He laughed. Next day, I started as a storekeeper accountant there. In 3 years, I was a chief financial officer of that hotel while I was graduating in school. That gave me not only an incredible competitive advantage versus any of my peers, because by the time I was graduating, I had a significant professional experience and the level of confidence I never had. But there is a reason I'm sharing this story with you today. It's full of arbitrage opportunities. We don't expect people to be graduating on a post-country collapse with a desperate financial need. But I do believe when Holland America Group hired me as a vice president, they made the same decision that that guy made many, many years ago. We hire people not based on the skills they have today. We hire people in that 30 minutes based on what we believe they're capable of. Back in Procter & Gamble world, we called it potential assessment. We sit today and talk with my leadership team about performance versus potential, but there is something that we need to think about every day when we educate and prepare people for the future is how in that 30 minutes of interview the person is able to communicate more of what they're going to be in their next 30 years of career. Because I think about that interview every time I make a decision about promoting somebody or hiring somebody. Every time I'm doing the interview, I keep asking myself what this person is going to be doing tomorrow, how much I can trust this person to do. I leave at that. I also had a lot of inspiring thoughts yesterday listening to Jeff. One is I definitely now categorize myself in the box of sprinters. And I also realized I had a revelation that I moved a lot too, and I still don't know where my box with the diplomas is. So that was an interesting. And the snow slopes, every time I go on the snow slopes, I feel like it's the first time and I need someone's help. My brother calls it pathetic. I now know that I'm just open to relearning things that I already learned.
All right, Mike.
All right. Well, first I'd say that Spartan's will and confidence without attitude are pretty aligned in shaping who I kind of am as a person. It's hard to sit here and realize that I've been, honestly, at one company for 28 years. I didn't go to Ford for 30 years. I had no desire. I went to Ford for 5 years. And it was a great place to learn. You keep moving on. But what I found is that my journey kept changing, and I had the opportunity to do so many unique things in so many areas of the business. I got to work all around the world. I got to live in Australia and Japan and do things from product development to marketing to the customer service division to strategy and, of course, finance throughout. You know, and you turn around and all of a sudden I'm 51 years old and I don't know what happened. And I'm now leading strategy for an industry that is undergoing a change that honestly hasn't happened since the beginning of the 20th century. I mean, just to give you a few facts, talk a little bit about electrification, autonomy, and mobility. One of the key inhibitors to change in the automotive industry has been the internal combustion engine. It's really why there's only been 10 to 15 competitors for over 100 years. The level of engineering expertise that was required and manufacturing expertise that was required to create that created unbelievable barriers to entry. And unfortunately, we took that as a given. And now what you're seeing through companies like Tesla and Faraday Future and others like that are, you know, with electrification, you know, many of us are finance people. We even built a motor in sophomore year in high school out of a potato. So, so think about what that's done to the barriers of entry. And now all of a sudden we're talking about completely new entrants, whether it's the two I mentioned or Google or Apple. We anticipate that by 2030, over 60% of the industry is electrified with plugs. That is a completely different business model than today. And it's not just the vehicle that has to change. The entire infrastructure, the support structure, everything about the business model needs to change. That's electrification. Autonomy. We believe that by 2030, 10% of all miles driven in the world and 20% of all car sales are going to be autonomous. I mean, think about that. It's a fundamental shift. Today, there are 9 million miles driven every minute. There are 30 vehicles sold every minute, which is pretty cool. But there's 9 million miles driven every minute. 125,000 taxis in service today, and Ubers. But when you think about fundamentally what autonomy can enable, and households being able to go from maybe 2 cars in the garage to 1 car in the garage because one will take you to work and then come back. It's the only asset where 96% of the time it's sitting there idle. How could you run your business if you had 4% uptime? I mean, think about that. The fundamental industry is going to change. And yes, the technology will get there. So by 2030, 20% of all vehicles be autonomous. And then when you think about mobility, I already mentioned, you know, some of these things, but from a sharing perspective, it all used to be about ownership. You know, if you go back generations, our idea of freedom at 16 years old was to get the keys to a car. The idea of freedom for younger people today is to never have keys to a car and never worry about that payment, and never worry about parking, and never worry about insurance. And when you think about what that entails from a business model perspective to go from an owned model to a shared model, it's fundamentally different. So despite all the experience that I've had, when you and it's great because we've gone through some bad times, we've gone through some great times. We've been able to, I think, withstand so much of what's gone in the auto industry because of who we are and the way we approach problems. But these are new problems that are facing us. And I really question whether we're bringing in the right people today to help us face those challenges.
Fabulous. Thank you for those preliminary remarks. The issue that perhaps is common to all of our institutions is getting some insight into arguably the programs in which we are making among the largest investments on our campuses, and that is the MBA programs, graduate programs in general. And so the first question that we want to get some perspective from each of these individuals is what are the trends in the industry in terms of hiring the MBAs, specifically kind of projecting out. Mike described the future of the auto industry. This is reflection on what we do, and that is trying to anticipate what's the future of our industry around MBAs, to get a sense of what does the future job market for MBA graduates look like. And so I'll turn it over to Art to begin with that, and then we'll just go down the line.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Sanjay. It's, at least in the banking world, particularly on Wall Street, it's not great news for MBAs. It's definitely a diminishing population. I mean, I think we were the king of hiring finance majors and MBA graduates for sure for years. But now, until interest rates come back and banks can make money, because everybody in here should be pretty familiar with how a bank makes money. We borrow money for $1 and we lend it for $1.50. But today we borrow it for $1 and we lend it for $1. So it's bad news, right? It means that the revenue is not coming. And so banking, which was a very dynamic, if you were running a bank, you had probably 2 or 3 or 4, maybe even 5 indicators that would judge success. Today there's one indicator in the banking world that judges success, and it's expense management. End of story. And people are saying, well, God, they criticize us saying, well, you're not thinking past today. And we go, that's right, we're not. We're trying to get to tomorrow. And for the time being, this is not a permanent shift, but it's clearly a temporary shift today. Paying $100,000 to $110,000 or $120,000 for an MBA graduate has become hard to justify when you can hire an undergraduate for $50. Maybe what you'll even see in banking, and then this is not totally a no, but the numbers are significantly reduced, and until the opportunity for banks to make money and be able to manage the bank slightly differently, I think you're going to see this trend for a little while, where hiring MBAs on Wall Street is not as popular as hiring undergraduates, because the differential between that 50 and 100 is just hard to justify, since for the most part we're training, whether we're training an undergraduate or a graduate, it's almost the same. We are very, very keen on the maturity of an MBA student. Many times they come with experience. They come with a lot of goodies, but they come with a price tag. And I think for the time being, the reality is that it's not a great trend.
Thanks. How about you, Natalia?
So I'll share a couple thoughts, since I recently went from transition from one industry to another, right? So Procter & Gamble has a very formal MBA hiring program, and it's a different, I have a 2 contrast of different experiences being at Procter and being now with Holland America Group. I do say I agree. This is not a great, it's a challenge for MBAs these days. When I was at Procter & Gamble, we continue to hire MBA students and we continue to have formal programs, but the proportion of MBA hires continue to go down. And in a company like Procter & Gamble, where it's a promote from within company, it's a long-term return on investment of hiring undergrad versus hiring MBA is just bigger, right? You hire an undergrad and you train them and you grow them, and in your culture if you hire right person with the right talent, and it's becoming less of a need to hiring MBAs. In my current company, it's a whole different world because we don't even hire separately MBAs or undergrads. We have a position opened, and we hire a person who is able to do the job. We post the job, and we're interviewing for the same job, both MBAs and undergrads, and you just pick whoever is the best match, right? And I would say, like never before, the price tag is a challenge now with my new company as well, because MBAs require relocations, they want a signing bonus, and they want this 100+ compensation, right? And I was one of them, and I'm biased. I love MBAs when they bring things to the table, but I would say here is when I hire MBAs and I'm happy for it, is when I am able to hire an MBA who I know is capable to come and start doing the job of managing others, right? Which means I'm not going to be hiring an MBA who just went to get MBA straight from undergrad for that job, right? I will, because of all other conflicting priorities, including the price tag, will likely hire undergrad for that. So when MBA is able to demonstrate to us that they have enough experience under their belt, they have enough maturity, and this education that they're able to come and do the job of the manager and leading others, then yes, then we give a preference to an MBA. But that requires certain experiences in the functional area as well, right? So I think that's maybe similar to the challenges that you are describing, right? A lot of conflicting priorities, including demands, and there are a lot of smarter and smarter undergrads who come and offer a lot of potential, and you just know you can take them, train them, grow them, maybe even invest in their post-education later, right? And they will stay with your company, and the return often is higher.
So I will give you strike three. When I joined, it was basically only MBAs. For most of my career, it was probably half and half. And I would say that over maybe about 10 years ago, it switched to about 30%. We're down to 5% MBAs. And the simple fact is, there's no value equation there. They're not bringing anything to the table that's unique. And I agree absolutely with Natalia. We're actually in the midst of launching a revised, very small, targeted MBA program where they actually come in as leaders, as managers of others. It's going to require a very different skill set. Because fundamentally, when we come in, when people come in fact, what we were finding, and I know this is terrible in the way it sounds, but many of them had an arrogance to them around, why do I need to do this job? Shouldn't I be in the C-suite? And and I know, again, I don't want to sound like an old fuddy-duddy because I'm in a 115-year-old company, but you got to learn a little bit about manufacturing and product development. If you don't come in with that, it's very hard. And so, we've looked at it. We don't see the value. We don't see the behaviors. And so what we're trying to do is fundamentally pivot to say, let's try and find targeted leaders that have a very different skill set.
I'm just going to add one thing to what Mike just said, and this is not to pile on the downside, but this is just to give a little bit of a spark to the upside. Once we're making decisions as executives on who to promote, I will tell you that at that stage the MBA comes in. So now you have the staff and you're able to judge them through your experience, and you have hand-on experience. And if you come down to a close tie, then clearly that extra educational requirement is an advantage. And so that almost leans towards maybe the MBAs coming out of school now have to kind of reset their expectation, just like those of us clearly in the banking industry have reset our expectations on compensation because the regulators have made sure of that. These people might have to reset their expectation on compensation at first, recognizing that it'll pay off down the road if it's the right education in the right spot.
Yeah, Art, I need to add, because the other part that we have done with our BBAs is we pay for their MBA program.
Right.
And so it's Michigan, Michigan State, Notre Dame, Ohio State. That's where most of them are going to go on the weekend programs generally. It's a great retention tool, but it gets them up to that level so much quicker. And and we do, I think, hiring, in order, or promotions, in order to reach upper levels in our company, an MBA is absolutely required. So you have this dichotomy that's required.
It's interesting, just to offer as a counter opinion to that.
Please.
It's one area where in both companies that I recently worked at the promotion, it completely did not matter. This is where you forget where your diplomas are, right? When we make a promotion decision, not a single time I remember in our discussion coming up like what kind of degrees a person has. At that point, we are looking at the performance, at the potential, so now you would tend to believe, and I, as an MBA graduate, tend to believe that it helped me progress faster than others because of the training and the skills and the maturity that the MBA program gave me, and the confidence and all this other good stuff that we talked about. And I hope that tends to help other fellow MBAs in the room. But when we are having and making a promotion decisions and having those discussions, we never look at what. And it's never been a requirement, right? So that's an interesting, that it seems like it's
I don't know
different.
if I'd call it a requirement. It's a de facto, and I think you're right. I think that the candidates who have an MBA have a level of maturity, have a level of exposure that others don't. And truthfully, we don't give all BBAs. We don't pay for all MBAs, right? We only pay for the ones that we think they should get. So.
Yeah.
Well, you're getting a good live demonstration of why we have diverse executive teams in most of our industry, because you're getting different perspectives, and that's right.
So this will lead in nicely to the next part of this segment, and that is about the challenges that the industry faces. And I think in a lot of ways, maybe you already talked a little bit about the main challenges that industry faces in hiring MBAs. Perhaps we can go directly into the second part of this question, this segment, and that is about the strengths and weaknesses of the graduates that you are hiring. What do you see is the strong suit? Where do you think they are falling down? That can be helpful for us in the academy to really start focusing on what our educational programs cannot do, or should not do. So,
Natalia,
how about that, Art?
Let's start.
Okay, let's start with Natalia.
Okay, all right. Well, I think there are, to answer that question, right, I'm going to highlight there are three. The industry I'm working on is Holland America Group is part of Carnival Corporation. It's the largest leisure travel company in the world, by far largest cruising industry company. The exciting part about cruising industry, it's growing like crazy. The growth opportunities are just unbelievable, right? Which brings certain expectations from people we hire. The other big, huge thing is we are a global company. We are truly, truly global company. Holland America Group has 36 ships that go 400 different destinations in the world, right? All 7 continents. Half of our guests are not from North America, and so half of our staff is not from North America, right? And that creates the need of people who are leading this company to be able to operate through the cultures, through different diversity groups, through time zones, through geographies, and that obviously impacts the talents that we are looking for. and through different regulations, right, and in the finance world, foreign exchanges and geopolitical situations and everything else. And the final thing is we talked a lot about the change, right? It's we are heavily capital-intensive companies, so return on a capital investment is essential to us. And so we cannot afford just keep building new ships or changing what's on our ships. So it is incredibly important for us to bring people with innovative, creative thinking and solutions who can tell me what can I do with the assets that I have today that will meet the future demands of our consumers without another $1 million capital investment, right? And so to summarize all of that is what we need today is the leaders who are bringing that maturity and a leadership potential, who are bringing communication skills that I will pause here, go beyond polished presentation skills. There is a huge difference in that. There is a huge difference. To be able to connect and operate through the global, very diverse environment is not being able to deliver a polished PowerPoint presentation. And I would add back to the challenges that we have. We talked, Mike mentioned the arrogance, right, of MBAs. What I think our MBAs could do better today is develop active listening skills as part of their communication skills. I do think that that's important for anyone, but it's particularly maybe we focus so much during our MBA program of coming and delivering this confidence and the presentations that we just forget to tell people that come and listen and learn is just as essential for the long-term success in the company. And so that's, I think, one of the trends we see. And finally, the creative thinking. By the way, I do think that the new generation is pretty good at that, right? They kind of grew in this world of creative thinking and flexibility, and if they're nourished right, they bring an incredible ideas on the table, and it's a matter of creating that environment for them to be able to speak up their ideas and execute them.
All right, we'll start with the industry. You know, I really wonder, again, and I'll just go back to 1989, and who I was looking at. So I was looking at Shearson Lehman. You know, I was looking at the consulting firms, and Ford showed up on campus. And I was from Detroit. I hadn't been home in 3 years. You know, I'd called my mom every now and then. And the only reason I interviewed with Ford, truthfully, because if I couldn't get a second interview back home, I was in the wrong field. And, you know, and all of a sudden I go into this interview and I'm hearing about the ability to actually have an impact on the future and change the way vehicles look and feel and what they're going to be and how they're marketed. And versus the other firms that I was interviewing with, I was like, holy cow, that really appeals to me. So I step back and I look at it, and you read the paper today, there isn't a newspaper or basically an investment banker that thinks anybody in auto who's an existing in auto should stay in business. In fact, if you look, our profits have grown from $7 billion a year to over $10 billion a year. We make 6.5 million vehicles with 2 to 3 sigma quality. We crank out $6 to $7 billion a year in free cash flow. We have a 6% dividend yield, and we're at $12 a share. Take the name off, and any other company, that is a AAA, or at least a AA rated company. So I question, what are the motivations of today's MBA students? Are they just chasing the, I want to all work at Google, I want to all work at Apple, I want to work in an investment bank? Are they really evaluating where they can make a difference? I mean, holy cow, what Natalia just talked about, the challenges at Holland America, the ability to be fundamentally global and reinvent an industry. Are you seeing people with that type of passion? And how are you getting them to consider? You know, luckily, Detroit is actually turning into a pretty cool place to live. I think the New York Times now writes an article on Detroit almost every week, which I haven't, a good article, by the way, which I haven't seen for my entire life. But, you know, you try and sell that outside of Ohio State and Notre Dame and Indiana and Michigan State, it's a pretty hard sell. But, you know, I think when I look at where this country's future is going to be, it's going to be in reinventing, continual reinvention of a lot of these industries that made us great in the first place. So how do you challenge your MBAs to say, go look at that? Because that's where you can really make a difference. In terms of strengths and weaknesses, I'd say the what, you know, to put it in Rich's parlance, is fine. You know, we have no questions when we look at the, you know, we make them do case things before we interview them and everything, and they nail it. So they get the finance, they get the marketing, they get the strategy. I do think it is the why. I think it's the soft skills. I was telling the guys before, I used to be for Michigan State, I led the exec, you know, for all of Ford's recruiting at Michigan State for, 8 years, something like that. I was in charge of coordinating all of it and making sure that, you know, we hire 400 or so people a year, not just for Michigan State, but, you know, through everywhere, make sure that that process works. I apply an airplane test. And the simple fact is can I sit next to this person on an airplane and at the end go, wow, that was a great flight. How interesting was this person? They have passion. They have commitment. They can talk. Because instead, you sit next to people who are just doing this all day. So I think the what is a real strength, but I really think the weakness is that why. It's that interpersonal skill. It's that ability to fundamentally understand what other people are saying and translate that into action.
Can I quickly add to that, Mike? Because we talked yesterday, someone asked Jeff that question, how do you balance the soft skills and technical skills, right? And we had the discussion last night. I think it's not just an and. The technical skills became a price of entry. So I don't expect, there is nothing more frustrating than hiring someone with fantastic soft skills who doesn't actually have technical skills. So it's just the question that the technical skills are not a differentiator anymore. So we as well do a lot of different interviews to test people's IQ and their technical abilities. So the candidates that even make it to the first time for the interview are those who already have a very strong and similar knowledge and education and technical understanding of the business. So after that, the decisions are made completely based on the soft skills. So it's not just an and. It's like one comes after another. One is a price of entry, and the second one is a true differentiator.
Yeah, I'll just add, in addition to all of this that I agree with, you know, there's two skills that I think that MBA students, even undergraduate, are coming out that naturally are learned in universities. One of the skills I think universities do a good job of, and the other one might be a little bit in danger. So the first skill is most higher education students have learned to deal with pressure. And I got to tell you, that's you may not realize you're teaching these students how to deal with pressure, but keep up the pressure. People, why do we need exams? I don't even remember what I learned in exams, but I remember the pressure of having to take that exam. And whether I crammed at night, it's a technique that works if none of you've done that, or I actually prepared properly and took a week or 10 days to go through the notes and maybe visit with the professor and see if I could get a little inkling of what was going to be on the test and did my homework, et cetera, et cetera. The point was, I learned how to deal with pressure, and that was a critical learning experience, and so you need to keep that up. So, people that are talking about maybe we should eliminate exams, don't do that. right? So I think that would be a mistake. The other thing is, it was mentioned last night, it's mentioned a couple of times, failure is very painful, but it's a good thing. So don't inflate grades. If the student is not getting the work done, give them a grade that's horrible and send a message. Let them know that they're failing. It's okay. They might actually react by trying to get better, as opposed to not recognizing the values and the lessons of failure. So that was mentioned last night. I think that it's a little bit in jeopardy in today's world. Everybody gets a trophy. That's another subject, but I think that's a bad idea. And the reality is that universities, particular higher education, graduate students, should be putting the effort in for quality work, and if they're not, they need to be sent a message that they're not doing it. And so don't sway off the path. There are things that you do today that are good.
That's fabulous. So this is, you've kind of gotten into this next segment that we had decided we'll touch on, and that is, if you think about all of the asks that are made of business schools specifically, but really university education in general, it's always been one of those things around, we need to be able to do this and that and that and that. And so as one in our roles imagines what is it that we should be focusing on in particular, the question is, what are the skills, knowledge that business schools in particularly should be focusing on to develop within our students, especially this next generation of talent that is coming out, given that there are constraints around time and resources for which we have these students. So something that you can address, what is it that maybe we could take off the table? Is there something based on your experiences over the last few years or so that you would say, this is no longer relevant and important for us to focus on in the business school? You could take that off the table and instead focus on something else. Maybe something along those lines. If you have thoughts or comments, that would be significantly appreciated, I'm sure. I know I would appreciate that. I'm sure a lot of my colleagues would appreciate that as well.
I guess I'll start this time. I guess it's hard for me to say what you take off because, again, I'll be like any other business. It's just I need this and. I will start from more of a technical side. I think the concept of analytics and big data is something that I would like to certainly see more candidates with that type of experiential background that are able to say at least the things I worked on in grad school. Show me how to take this cacophony of ones and zeros or whatever it is and turn it into insights. I think that's a skill that I don't want to just rely on IT people for. I think that's something that business people should really be taking the lead on. So I think that's from a technical standpoint. From a leadership standpoint, it really is to the point that Art was talking about. I hate calling it innovation mindset because that sounds kind of academic, but okay.
You wouldn't be out of
Sorry
place.
about that.
You wouldn't be out of place using that.
But let me give you an example. I'll give you an example. For those of you who don't know, Dan Gilbert, he's one of the leading entrepreneurs in America, the Quicken family of companies. There's about 118 companies. We work very closely with Dan on a number of different things. And I won't take you through the color of some of his meetings, but his fundamental belief is if my team isn't failing 30% of the time, then we're not getting the job done. So how do you teach that? But by the way, how do you teach that in a way that's not, putting it all on black, right? I can't fundamentally bet the company all the time. I don't think you should be teaching that. But how do you teach innovation or change or risk-taking in appropriate, think about it in almost a venture capitalist mindset, right? I'm going to give you angel funding, and then I'm going to give you seed funding, and then I'm going to get you to fundamentally create business models. That doesn't have to just be in new businesses. That has to be in established businesses as well. So how are you teaching that mindset? I think that's something that's absolutely critical. And then the other one is really around working cross-functionally, because none of that, again, think about an individual entrepreneur startup. There's 5 people in the garage. There isn't a CEO and a CFO and a CIO. There's 5 people in the garage. And so the ability to communicate and fundamentally learn from others and take the roles on that are required to be had to move forward, I think is really important. And so that ability to cross over cross-functionally, I would like to see examples of that. I want to have them talk about in the interviews how we had a cross-functional team with the engineering school and the IT school, and fundamentally created something. Right? A bunch of MBAs doing something together doesn't help me.
How do we create the practical experience during MBA program? I'm sure you all have some sort of these initiatives already. Looking back at Michigan State, right? One of the most fascinating, helpful experiences that a lot me and my peers had is we ran our own consulting company. We ran the Spartan Consulting when we walked in the real world, when we made real money, and part of it was for the school and part of it was for students. How do you create these environments where people can be entrepreneurs, where they can step into the mindset that they never considered before, that they can step out of comfort zone and try something beyond just academic, that it's a practical, that's a real learning experience with opportunity to fail or opportunity to succeed, right? So I think all of you probably already doing something similar, and I think it's adding a huge value. How do we take it to the next level should be the question. The second one is everyone is doing it, and I just love it. The case competitions, I just love it. Like people who go through this experience of case competitions and they do it, and when I see it or they bring it up in the interview, I know these people come with a certain set of going through that challenge, right? Of being trained to face the challenge and think quickly and be able to present and defend their ideas and work together under a very constrained environment. So how do we do more of that in the different forms and shapes, right? There must be something beyond just case competition. There must be something that we could do ongoingly in a school to create that environment of constant, to basically simulate that change. What's unique about case competition is you have a very limited amount of time with a very imperfect information. How do we create that environment through the school year that they have to constantly change something with a set of imperfect information? And the last one is that diversity aspect, the global environment. How in a school we already have a very diverse set of students, all of you do. How do we take more advantages of that and prepare our leaders to truly operate across cultures? Is there study abroad programs? They are very expensive. I understand that not all schools and not all students can afford it, but how can we replicate that in a more accessible way for all the students?
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that last point of globalization. Well, first, I, like Mike and Natalia, can't think of anything to take off the table, unfortunately, and we recognize to put things on the table, you have to take them off, but so we're not going to help you there. But the reality is there's plenty to think about to put on the table. The globalization issue we've talked about for many, many years, but we really need to try to address this, because I give you my own personal experience. I was definitely the #1 God Bless America person in the world when I started working at the Chase Manhattan Bank, and the executives there quickly recognized that I had the potential to become a senior executive, but this only America thing needed to go, and I needed globalization. I needed some global experience. And even when I was offered the job, the opportunity to go overseas, I said no. Don't ask me why I did that, but I said no. I didn't think I needed it. I was already working at head office, so now I'm going to get further away from head office, so my ability to be the president of the bank was going to diminish, and that sounded like a bad idea to me, but anyhow, I was forced to go, so if I wanted to keep my job. So I went, and with no globalization experience whatsoever, you know, I luckily went to London, so they spoke almost American. They spoke English, which I learned quickly. But I spent the first 6 months in London trying to change the whole country into America. And that was just a waste of time, right? I could have saved myself 6 months of my life if I had even an awareness that there are different, as the British love to say, horses for courses. You know, different strokes for different folks. And these type of lessons were critical, and they can be taught, whether it's some assignment abroad or some learning abroad, or bringing in people who have been overseas and talking about it doesn't seem to work. I think we've got to get the globalization thing into the program somehow. It's critical. That's #1. And #2, with the new generation, I do think we have to think about teaching social skills and networking skills. I mean, that's probably not a long course, but nonetheless, it's lessons, right? How to have a cup of coffee with somebody without just drinking the coffee, right? Or lunch or something, and somehow making it through past 15 minutes, very much like the airplane speech. So these skills, I think, are diminishing, and I know for me, I had four years of that lesson by living in a fraternity house in my undergraduate experience, and believe it or not, that helped in many, 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 many ways. But I think now that's something that higher education has to at least be aware of, that these are critical skills in the world today, and we need to pay attention and do something about it.
Fabulous. We have a little less than 15 minutes. Definitely invite questions from the floor at this time if you have any to ask. Please, if you would step to the microphone, there are 2 of them here, that would be great.
Well, I think I'm one of the oldest faculty in this room, you know. And after 43 years teaching, I write a lot of book, paper, edit journal. Next 5 years, I spend a lot of time try to explain my fears. What's wrong with teaching MBA? You know? After I teach in Georgia, Illinois, here, I find out you are criticized about MBA students. Not their fault, it's professors' fault, you know. University's fault, because we mislead them, okay? For example, when I teach at Illinois, I teach in MBA, I can mention calculus. Now at the UCLA, Northwestern, New York University, my friend told me, if you teach MBA, you mention calculus, they think you're nuts. You know? So you can see, we spoil the MBA. So what I propose is first, and create an innovative and active approach to teaching finance. Somebody, unfortunately, I distribute my autobiography I am talking about. How we can do it? We throw students into the pool, let them how to swim in. Then they analyze data. You see, when I teach here, Johnson & Johnson data is the most important for me. So eventually, in addition to that, my outlook always called from east to west. Now we cannot avoid the Chinese cultural ideology, no matter we think they are evil or not. We should understand. We send a lot of MBA students to China, Asian, to do business. They even don't know their culture. That's harmful, you know. So what I advise, what I push now, I'm writing a paper called Evolution of American Education for Last Half Century. I emphasize two things. One, create a mixture of East versus West culture. Secondly, we should let students know, if you try to learn, you need headache. Learning without headache, that essential, we fool them. Okay? That's my comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. I was just curious. We spent a lot of time talking about some of the traditional aspects of what's good or bad about being in an MBA, but as I'm sure you're all well aware, in the aftermath of the financial crisis, not just bankers became gangsters, but every CEO in the country or the world became a villain. And it didn't take the critics long before they started pointing the finger at the MBA programs where they received their education. And I'm sure all of us in this room in the last 5, 6, 7 years have invested a lot of time in our curriculums trying to emphasize the importance of ethics. None of you mentioned ethics at all in your discussion, and I'd just be curious if that's something that you think about when you're hiring MBAs.
I guess I look at it, and what I look for, again, is I think ethics underscore everything. In fact, I don't talk about it because I think it's, you know, to Natalia's point, it's a given. It's an expectation. And I think it goes back to what are the values that the school espouses. One of the questions I ask people are, you know, how do you define yourself? If there are 3 things, you know, that your parents taught you, what are they? Those are the types of things that I want to understand. And truthfully, again, for Ford Motor Company, it is confidence without attitude. It is Spartan's will. It's this view of get the job done, right? And you can talk about it afterwards. And that's what we look for in our employees, and I think that that's part of the screening process for us. It's just in the 3 questions.
Yeah, I can chip in big time on ethics, and boy, we could talk about this for a long time. I'm just going to stick up for bankers slightly, and I don't want to get any tomatoes thrown at me, but you know, banking for the longest time, particularly Wall Street and other banks throughout the country, is one of the few professions over the years that when you get your first job at a bank, you're bonded. You actually get fingerprinted, you're bonded, and it's a reminder that if you do something wrong or break the rules, you're going to jail. So right off the bat, anybody in the finance industry or banking industry understood that there were rules to follow. So that was a given, right? Now, then we learned that it was you could follow the rules and still do bad things, right? And I think that was the lesson over the last probably, it was probably always there for many, many bankers. You know, it's a few bad ones that push the reputation. But the reality is the emphasis on ethics in every firm over the last 10 years in particular have been so significant internally that you can't help but be aware of it. And so even if the MBA programs, and I know all of them, all the programs have the students aware of ethics, but they get the heavy, heavy, heavy dose when they join one of these firms now. So if somehow you miss it by the time you get to banking, or by the time you get to these firms, you won't miss it when you're there. And if you miss it after that, then you could go to jail. It's okay. So it's a given.
One of the other things you should also mention is don't get red wine on your
Oh,
coffee.
thanks, Mike. Yeah, that's very nice. But that's all right. Usually happens when somebody else hits you.
But after 37 years, I retired from Citigroup in this summer, and I've done a lot of work on the recruiting side. And the observations I've seen with regards to the MBAs versus BAs, and like your observations on this, are three things. One is that in terms of careers, very few people today will spend decades with a company. So when you make an investment in an employee, if you're not going to make that investment for longer than 2 or 3 years, why invest in that MBA if he or she's not going to move on? The second thing actually is a positive, that the universities have done a tremendous improvement in their programs in the BAs. The BA programs have gotten really, really good across the board, and when you combine that with internships, the BA who's coming out of college today is far more prepared than ever I was when I was a BA coming out of college. So I think those three factors, I think, have created a transformational situation where the BA is an attractive candidate, much more so than the MBA. And while there'll still be MBAs, the fact that those programs across the nation have gotten better with internships and also the duration, I think those have affected the MBA hirings as well.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add quickly, right? We talked about the ethics, price of entry, agree with all of this. I think we so much talked about everything that can be better with this generation and MBAs. I just want to say, like, that point about beyond yourself, this new generation of millennials are really strong in that. They want to do things that are more than themselves. That's their strength. They come and they want to do. When we started, we were very focused on kind of like our career. Shared my story, right? My dream was for my family to have a better life, right? The millennials now, they want to do things beyond themselves. So it's a natural strength they do bring to the table. I actually like to remind my colleagues in companies I work that people interview us just like we are interviewing them. Mm-hmm. I only will choose, and they will choose the companies where they feel that the company supports the values that they have. And so I think that's a huge strength that this new generation brings is an ability to develop the solutions, develop the things that are kind of win-win. It's not win-lose, and it brings more goodness to the world and to the companies than just themselves, right?
Thank you, Natalia. We'll make this the last question.
Thank you very much. Erin O'Brien, University at Buffalo. So we've talked a lot about the undergraduate programs and we've talked a lot about MBAs, but many business schools nowadays have Masters of Science programs and Masters in Management programs that are becoming much larger than their MBA programs. So do your answers change when you talk about a student who has vertical depth, say a Masters of Science in Finance versus an MBA program?
Yeah, I'm going to just take that one real quick. The one that I think continues to get some attention is the Masters of Management. A focus on management and leadership. There's probably a pretty good discussion around inside the United States and globally of a potential leadership void, and I think that any program that focuses on leadership skills more than the core, and it could differentiate, by the way, the MBA or the master's program from the undergraduate program. The undergraduate program is going to be more of a beginning of a liberal arts program and a wider, broader education to give people skills, and then when you get to the graduate program, you focus on leadership skills. That's what we're looking for. And it's unlikely that we're going to get a leader right off the ground from an undergraduate program, but it is fairly likely, as Mike explained with Ford and their new program, that we're looking for leaders. So maybe there's an opportunity for these programs to differentiate themselves with a real core focus on leadership.
I'd say at Ford, those types of programs we would use very selectively, primarily in our accounting area where you need, fundamental experts. For the rest of our people, we really do expect them, honestly, I feel I want to hire COOs at a minimum. And so part of what we're looking for when we bring them in is the ability to really move throughout the business. We're just not that exposed to the specific non-MBA type programs as much.
It's the breadth versus depth argument, right? I think the advantages of MBA is providing that breadth opportunities when there are more rounded skills and more diverse challenges that people experience and during the MBAs that they bring to the table. Maybe not as much depth, but something that, again, talking about potential can enable their success maybe more 30 years ahead than depth in one specific area.
Thank you very much. I mean, as I hope you got a feel for it from this panel, our need to be able to constantly talk to our folks in industry and feel them out in terms of what's going on is probably the best takeaway for me. Personally, I would hope that the insights that this panel provided spur some thoughts in your own minds as to what we can do individually, but also collectively on our campuses as we think about innovation in graduate business education, the theme of this conference.